o'clock. It's the voice of Indiana County, WCCS 101.1 FM and AM 1160. Happy Friday to you. We're on the way today to 28 degrees. We started at 27, so not a whole lot of distance to go before we get there this morning. Mr. Bob Pollock is in the studio with us this morning, and our conversation with Bob Pollock brought to you by Marcus & Mack, a law firm representing injured people. Morning to you, sir.
Good morning.
How are you?
Good. How are you?
Surviving the wind and everything else?
Yeah, that was something.
Yeah.
The rain and the wind.
1.39 inches of rain yesterday, and winds gusting up to about 50 miles an hour, all kinds of trees. I guess if you were wondering, is that tree dead or is that branch dead, you found out.
You might have found out. That's right.
Yeah, the guy in front of me, he hit a tree that had come down this morning.
Oh.
No damage to his car. He didn't think. He says, I guess I'll find out in another mile or so if I punched a hole in the radiator or anything. But, yeah, he hit that baby pretty hard. You get that way at this time of the year, and you start thinking about things that are going on. You have a very detailed document in front of you. What is that?
Well, it's called the Club Crowd.
Yeah, what's that?
Yeah. Well, it has to do with apples.
Really?
Yeah, if you want to talk about apples this morning.
Let's talk about apples.
We could
Why
do
not?
that.
Why not?
Because you may, this time of year,
Mm-hmm.
oftentimes our local orchards, they had their crop in the late summer and fall, and they've sold that all now. And so if you want an apple, where do you go? You go to the store.
Yeah, okay.
So there might be some different names and apples there that you don't recognize.
Oh, different varieties of
different
apples?
varieties,
Okay.
yes. Yeah.
Right.
That seems to be a popular trend of late.
That's what the Club Crowd is about?
And that's what the Club Crowd's about. Of course, there's a history to that.
Mm-hmm.
The production of apples doesn't happen overnight. It's years in the making, as well as the going back to the breeding, finding new apple varieties. We went for decades, with pretty staple number of varieties. Every now and then there'd be a new one come on board.
Yeah.
But of course, the Red Delicious, the Golden Delicious, the Stamen,
The Macintosh,
all those,
Jonathan's.
are just household names.
Yeah, and then the Honeycrisps came out a couple of years ago, and they became really popular.
And that really kind of was a tipping point when that variety hit the market, because it was different, and it had very juicy, very crunchy, for the most part, very tasty apple, as long as you like those kind of apples.
A little sweet and sour taste to it.
Yeah.
Yeah, I love them a lot.
And especially that crunchy part. A lot of people like to bite into an apple and have that crunch. And then when you got in there, it wasn't real hard. I mean, there's apples that can be pretty firm. When you bite in,
they fight back.
They fight back, yeah. And if you have teeth issues, might be the only time
you lose that fight.
Yeah, you don't eat that apple anymore. And so when that kind of started some new trends because of the qualities of that apple.
Mm-hmm.
And then at the same time, there was within the breeding world, used to be a lot of the varieties were, that was, you'd have a researcher at a university, and they would plant out all these different crosses. They would make crosses individually. They would plant those out, and then you had to wait years in order to see what you got.
Yeah.
Plant seeds, as well as make other plant a certain variety that had certain characteristics that you wanted, both from a growing perspective as well as a eating perspective, use perspective. Try to mesh those together, improve what we had. So the folks that bred the Honeycrisp, they did pretty well.
Yeah.
Yeah. So then that becomes a new standard to try to beat. The horticulturally, the growing part of Honeycrisp can be pretty challenging. They're kind of a tough variety to grow, so that gave some incentive for people to look at, can we bring some characteristics of other varieties that are more horticulturally sound and consistent, and breed that bring those genetics into the flavor, the taste, the crisp
Yeah.
part of the Honeycrisp.
I recall reading a year or so ago about how the Honeycrisp, and there was another variety that came out of the crisp variety that I don't know if it was Golden Crisp or what it was, that they said was actually harming the apple industry because everybody became laser focused on them to the detriment of all the other varieties.
Yeah, and that's
it's hard to grow.
Right, and that's part of it. The other thing, as traditional breeding programs, as the funding for those declined, then that left openings in the industry and for private individuals to pick that up. So that's happened. Certain companies, even orchards, the owners of orchards, they may have found a variety within their orchard, and that's oftentimes how things happened. It was they had a tree in the orchard, and there was a branch that had something that an apple was redder, or so, because there's a lot of introductions that have happened over time. It's the same apple, but the coloring was better, and so they were able to propagate that vegetatively, and so we have very red apples and very yellow apples, and some of those characteristics have come along the way too. So private industry kind of came in here. Universities were still involved, and then what started to happen was they got into the patenting of varieties.
Oh, okay.
Yeah, so
they're trademarking their own.
They
their
developed
own
it. Yeah, developed it, patented it, and there's a lot of varieties of a lot of different crops that you can, you look in the catalog, and when you purchase that variety, anybody can purchase it. It's on patent, but you can purchase it. You pay a royalty to buy that variety, which goes back to the licensee of that. And then the other thing that happened was not only did they do that, and then those patents, I think, are good for 14 years on plant material. There's different groupings of how long patents can go on different products, but I think it's 14 years for plant-based products. And then they started naming these. So it had an original name, which may not be very...
A scientific type name?
Yeah, it might be scientific, or it might just be a number. It might have been MN85 or something like that, and that just goes back to MN might stand for Minnesota.
Yeah.
And then it was cross number 85 that they made that happened.
But if it's going to sell, it needs a sexy name.
Yeah, it needs a
sexy apple name.
Much nicer name.
Mm-hmm.
So then they trademarked
the
names. And then on top of that, why it's kind of called the club group is that they limited access. So Honeycrisp, any grower, anybody, that was grown by the nurseries, marketed, and anybody could buy that and plant it in their backyard if you wanted to. With a lot of these newer varieties, that doesn't happen. It's exclusive. There's a select group of growers. It might only be available to growers in one state or one region, or growers that they produce it, and then they sell them all wholesale to a distribution company.
Thus creating the apple snobs.
Yeah. And then the distribution company owns the licensing for that product.
All right. So, not a whole lot of time left. So explain the club crowd to
Yeah,
what
so
is that?
We've got all these different varieties now that you might see on the market. Some are not available nationwide. Some are available regionally. Others might be available under one name, like Rave is one of those, that probably on the West Coast you might find it in the store as Rave. But then what those growers did was license it to another distributor, like in the East Coast, and they have to call it First Kiss.
So a different name.
Yeah. So
there's the sexiness part.
Yeah, yeah. And then we've got a whole bunch of other ones in there: Koru, Autumn Glory, Sugar Bee. If I can read this. Yeah. Smitten is another one. Envy, Jazz.
Yeah.
So there's just a host of these. But I guess the key thing is, you kind of have to try them to know whether you like them or not. And then know that they're only grown, in a certain region of the country or even a certain state, and they're licensed.
So if I'm eating a first crisp here or
Yeah.
a first kiss here in Pennsylvania and I take a trip to California and I want one of those, I'm going to have to go to the store and look for a rave instead.
Yes, that's right.
All right. That's the club crowd. So Pennsylvania apples, I see you have a separate sheet there. Get to know Pennsylvania apples. What's that about?
But that's just a marketing piece that they have that shows some of the different varieties that are available in Pennsylvania. Of course, Gala is now the top-selling variety across the country. Of course, that used to be held for decades by Red Delicious. That is now kind of gone by the wayside. There's still a lot of Red Delicious sold, but Gala is the number one selling. It's moved its way up
because Red Delicious tastes like wood.
Yes. Yeah, in most cases, that's right. That's right.
Tasteless. All right. Everybody has their favorites.
Yeah, that's right. Yeah. So just knowing why you might be seeing all these different varieties. A lot of times they're packaged very differently. They might be in a smaller quantity in a pretty showy container as opposed to being individual apples. And then all these different names that you're going to see as you look around. You'll still see, some of the traditional apples there also, but these, and in different markets and different stores, they'll pick up some of these, not all of these, so you'll see some in one grocery chain and others in another.
And then you find apples that people say, well, these are cooking apples, and these are eating apples, and these are applesauce apples.
And there's several different ones that have crisp in the name, Cosmic Crisp, and, of course, the Honey Crisp, and there's a couple others, but then, of course, that is descriptive of what you're going to get, that nice crisp bite when you bite into it.
There you go. Conversation about apples today with Mr. Bob Pollock from the Extension Service here on Indiana in the Morning. Thanks.
You're welcome.
We appreciate that. I see a little flurries coming outside right now. AccuWeather says we're going to have some of those today, and we're on the way to 28. We're started at 27. It is the voice of Indiana County. It's WCCS 101.1 FM and AM 1160. Fox News is up next at the top of the hour. Josh Whittison with us then from the WCCS newsroom.
Renda Media's October Job Fair was a huge success, and the date has been set for our spring event. Job Fair 2022 will be held Thursday, March 31st at the Indiana Mall. Reserve your space today by calling Carrie at 724-471-1035 or email crayco@rendabroadcasting.com.
You're all